Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with our weekly Q&A thing. This is season 13, episode 11. You're consuming it how you're consuming it. And however you're consuming it right now, there's one other way that you could be. Unless for some reason you've got like both things open simultaneously and you're playing them like slightly out of sync. In which case, it sounds like it would be a really unpleasant experience, but theoretically you could have them both on at once, I guess.
Or you can mute the video and listen to the podcast.
There'd be no value to it, though.
No, except to us.
It could happen. Well, not even, really, because...
I guess when you say it's so diminishingly small that it pretty much is no value.
Technically, on the YouTube video, there is some value from ad revenue. Yeah. And on the podcast, there is literally no value because we don't make any money out of it whatsoever. Right. There's no nothing. So, really, if you want to support us, you give us $1 a month on Patreon or something like that. Yeah. Because there's nothing you can do short of like fraudulent watch activity that could reach the level of like tossing us the equivalent of a cup of coffee sort of in terms of money. But that, we're not pushing hard for that, right? You support us if you really want to. And we got lots of jibber jabber about, so we won't belabor that point. Mm-hmm. So let me start by making it properly in justice. You're watching Rebirth Green Arrow, who we expect to be the challenge character this week based on the pattern, the early access pack, plus the fact that they haven't brought back the remaining 12 missing challenge characters like we were hoping they would. What you'll notice in the fights that stands out to me is that he's a little bit difficult to use. He's one of those late game challenge characters that are decently high powered, but the special 2 can't knock anybody out except for on the last hit. Yeah. And that makes it difficult. So even though we've geared him with the source, the companion gear, the Enchantress?
Enchantress. Brain fart.
That's okay.
To counter that, the toughest team is always the Blackest Night Hawkgirl team with at least 3 revives, and so every time you have to tag him out and take advantage of Rebirth Raven's passive, which makes it harder. And his special 1 power drains, so it's got reduced damage, so it makes it a very bad fallback backup plan when you don't want to do a special 2 because the opponent has low health, but a special 1 just doesn't do enough damage to make it useful to finish off most of those characters. So you want to, anyways, to protect yourself. Anyways, so lots of stuff politically that I want to talk about. Well, it's not even so much politically as in this is just what's happening in the news. This is top of mind. This is, and today it's Tuesday now. Before it got to today, in my mind, what I really wanted to talk about was what happened last week, Friday. And it's not even, we're Canadian, so it's not our government, but the whole meeting in the White House with Zelensky and Trump and Vance. And I'm not going to belabor the point, I guess, because, I think pretty much everybody knows what happened. I want to point out, though, that the silver lining for me, because, listen, everything else has been said, but the silver lining for me is that all the ambiguity is gone. There is absolutely no way that you can, in good faith, say that there is any sort of question about how badly the U.S. is managing their relationships with other countries and how much of a bald-faced lie the pretenses that are being used to justify unreasonable actions. So withholding funding for the Ukraine. And that ties into the next part, which is now, today, Tuesday, officially, the U.S. has introduced the trade tariffs of 25% on everything coming from Canada, except for energy, which is 10%. Yeah. And here's the thing, too. I mean, whatever pretense, this is what galls me a little bit about how some of the talking heads on TV are talking about it, where they talk about how, well, despite Canada doing a bunch of stuff about fentanyl, nobody cares. Trump doesn't care about the fentanyl coming from Canada because there's hardly any. It's just not a thing. Mm-hmm. The degree to which fentanyl is coming from Canada and the States is dwarfed by the amount of fentanyl that's coming from the States into Canada.
Yeah.
Again, it's a pretense. And what's wild to me is that anybody who is still able to say, yeah, the tariffs are good, or yeah, that was a good meeting between, United States and Ukraine. Again, either bad faith, liars, or just really that willing to let somebody else decide for you how you want to think. Mm-hmm. Like what you've really done is you've abrogated any kind of responsibility for your thought or your vote or whatever. And
where does that abrogate it?
Yeah, abrogate. So you're sort of giving it up. Like
okay.
You're giving up your responsibility for it, right? I think that was a term that had more to do with kings and stuff.
I know abdicate, like abdicating a throne, but I'm not sure about abrogate as a word. I've never heard that one before.
I used it, but I think I have to look it up now.
Okay.
But I think the point being that there's no doubt. I mean, when Hillary Clinton said a few years back that there were, what do you call it? Evade.
Okay, like evade as in responsibility or duty, abrogate. abrogate. Okay, cool. Yeah, no, just learning a new word.
So, what was I saying? So there were really some deplorables, and it wasn't everybody. But I think the joke that's making the rounds now really stands is that, you know what they used to call the people back in Germany who were willing to go along with the Nazis because they liked their economic policy or
is the joke whatever. Nazis?
Yeah, you know what they called them? They called them Nazis. Mm-hmm. Like, nobody cares. I mean, if you're willing to sit with, if you're willing to encourage, if you're willing to support Nazis, you're pretty much a Nazi. And you want to use a different term, that's fine. Fascist, whatever. But these are people who are not good people. Like, I mean, it can't be all this stuff that's happening where the president is taking away Congress's right to decide how money is spent, and then totally destroying stuff. I mean, again, in tech, that probably makes sense, right? You have software, it doesn't work, you wipe the slate clean, you start over again.
Well, I think specifically the ideas of because of how much of a first mover's advantage you often have in tech, and because of how important it is to get a moat, which is just sort of like a defensible position, right? Yeah. You want more data, you want more users, you want more market share, you want all this stuff, and all that stuff is more important than a lot of the details, right? Yeah. And I think with social media and things like that, you've already seen the point where that stops working, right? Where when you're moving fast and just trying to capture market share at the cost of anything else, some tech companies are just too important to your daily life and sort of like cognitive function and everything else, right? For you to just have that really fast sort of move fast and break things mentality, which was Facebook and Zuckerberg's catchphrase. But in government, right? I think it's even more so where like you can't. There are things that you can't break.
Well, the difference really...
Without there being exceptionally high cost.
Because this has been established over hundreds of years when you talk about the different kinds of government, the government specifically or governing in general. And what you've got are people who have had some success doing brand new things in areas where there is innovation. Mm-hmm. And what you see is people going in who have no experience with this, breaking stuff, and then realizing, oh, that's why they did it like that.
Yeah.
Right? Like, to me, it's like when Elon Musk bought Twitter.
Yeah.
And his assumption going in was, well, the reason why it's not so successful is because it's run by
the wrong people.
Liberals.
There's a bloat
who are silencing the conservative voices.
Yeah.
And censoring whatever, and it's not. They were just, it was just a company trying to make money, and the way to make money was trying not to alienate a large portion of their audience. And you see that now because, all the sponsors, advertisers are leaving because apparently, I think Elon Musk is suing them trying to force to force them to advertise with them because, you know, they have an obligation.
And, you know, he fired 80% of the staff, but also, like, Twitter's valuation has gone down by, like, 80%.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So...
Well, it's the same principle. We talked about this, right? With malls, where if you decrease the number of people that you have selling stuff, you're going to sell less. Even though that seems like the obvious place to try to cut costs, because that's one of your biggest costs, is people.
Yeah.
So, God, and it's scary, too, because it feels like there's not a lot of stability. There's not a lot of predictability. And it's one of those things that whatever gets fixed, whatever damage is done, I think it's going to be longer lasting than just the 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Because one is that if you know that the systems in place cannot protect you from a bad actor coming in,
mm-hmm.
then what's to stop the next bad actor?
You lose institutional trust.
Yes.
Which is like an important thing, because like I think a lot of our systems are very trust-based systems, right?
Yes.
Like you talk about the way that like the anchoring value of money is like a trust-based system, right? It's a fiat currency. It's not anchored in any real like objective value, and it's like past the point where like, you know, we could all just agree tomorrow, you know, I don't care about money, and then it, you know, there's no money anymore.
But it couldn't start from that. I mean, cryptocurrency aside, it started actually as representing stuff, right? Like there used to be money, there used to be gold in the Federal Reserves.
Yeah.
So it had to be the transition because people couldn't just make that jump. And I think that's the resistance you're seeing with cryptocurrency, because you're trying to make that jump to something that is completely trust-based.
Yeah.
When that's not where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, sorry.
But so that we live in a very highly trust-based society, and I think like erosion of trust in, you know, experts in public policy, in the government, right? I think to some extent erosion in trust is part of what led to Trump, right? Where people like were fatigued by experts and all of this stuff, and you can say whether that's fair or reasonable or not, and whether he was the correct response to that concern, right? Mm-hmm. But I think in a lot of ways, erosion of trust in career politicians and stuff like that is part of what allowed Trump to be elected, or part of what made Trump, I think, appealing to the people who voted for him, right? And then I think the problem is that Trump is causing a further erosion of trust in sort of the systems of democracy and the U.S. government and the U.S. as a state and a power, right? Talking about how we relate to the states, right?
Sure,
as like a party external to them. And so part of the problem is that when stuff is very trust-based, you know, can be some real damage caused when that breaks down. And trust is easier to lose than it is to build back and re
100%. Yeah. Absolutely.
Especially when it's systemic like this, because it's exactly what you're saying, right? It's that, you know, you can say Trump was a bad actor, and now that he's gone, I'm going to try to do stuff different. But if you know that the person sitting behind the wheel, the person at the controls, right, has so much control, you go, okay, well, we've got a different person now. What's to stop the next person from blowing it up again, right? And if the answer is, well, we won't vote them in, right? Then
that's not an answer.
Well,
that's useless. That's not a useful answer, because you voted in, you don't know necessarily. Like, people make promises, you don't know what they're going to do.
You go back to that trust. This is an entirely separate point. A little while ago looked into Colonel Sanders and his history, because you were talking about Scott's Chicken Villas.
Yes.
And how that was in like the Greater Toronto area. And I learned that Colonel Sanders moved here.
Yes, he did. He was living in Mississauga, I think.
But the one quote that I saw coming up, because I looked it up again to give somebody else the accurate information, is that he was talking about how in Canada you can do things on handshakes deals, but like you can't trust people down in the States. Yeah. So not to say that that's like, you know, true or not true, but I think it's funny because it feels kind of like the trust-based system feels related to what we're talking about. It is a Canada versus a States thing. Yeah. And I also think it's funny because I really think about Colonel Sanders as this sort of like brand image of a Southern gentleman. So the idea that he was living in Mississauga, being like, you can't trust those folks down in the States. They'll try to rob you blind while you're not looking.
And by the time he got here, he hated the way it was being made in the States.
Yeah. He very publicly said a bunch of really disparaging stuff. He said that the gravy, because he was really proud of the gravy, he said that gravy is wallpaper paste. And I would know because I've seen wallpaper paste being made. Anyways.
So we are really in uncertain times. Like, we really don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I know, I mean, this is the thing, right? Like, again, one of the good things about these kind of moments that give you clarity, there's no ambiguity. You know, it has nothing to do with that. You know that what cannot be big because whatever you concede, that agreement can be torn up tomorrow. Like, Ukraine gave up their nuclear arsenal in the late 90s for assurances of protection against Russia. Mm-hmm. Well, that wasn't very smart. Who's got the teeth to enforce that now? Mm-hmm. That they're being attacked by Russia.
It is challenging, yeah. And it's hard too, because I think really the thing, there's fights on a few fronts, but I think one of the bigger ones is, especially as somebody who is not in the States and has even less of an ability to exert any kind of, control, like not even as much as a vote, right?
Right.
It's just not losing hope and not sort of hitting that nihilistic point, right? Because there is still there's always meaningful stuff you can do.
Sure.
And outcomes are not binary, they're incremental. Some outcomes are, right? Like who was elected is a binary outcome. But the sort of long-term like outcomes, be them like positive or negative, right, are incremental and gradiated, and there's better or worse versions. You just got to keep doing your best. But it is unfortunate to see, and it's hard to deal with uncertainty, right? I think uncertainty is one of those things where that's why there is so much value to like accurate modeling, right? But just like knowing what things are going to look like and understanding how things are going to go, and it's hard to prepare when you don't even know what you're preparing for exactly, right?
Sure.
So anyways,
yeah.
Do you want to...
Yeah, we got some questions. The first one's from Burke's Show Me Mad MMS. Burke, show me.
So they say,
MMS.
Okay. Late comment, I'll say that it's quite interesting to make the Pierre and Trump comparison because my personal focus was more so on the PM stepping down. It's a weird time because I personally don't think Liberal have a great shot. The best they can do is lose as less seats as possible, but you never know. I think the quote economy comment I made was not answered, or I didn't get the answer I really expected / want. As of right now, USA treatment of Canada is pretty hostile, considering these two countries could be nominated for best longest lasting allies. I feel this treatment is what I would expect for China, considering they are more opposing each other. Thankfully for Canada, quote, have some cards. Have a lot of resources and materials. Tariffs will absolutely shake the economy, but if other countries become a bigger partner and the currency keeps dropping, Canada could become a country that doesn't solely rely on one place, diversifying itself. But I think Canada is a country with a lot of potential, just missing that little piece. So we will see what happens next.
All right, so one thing that jumps out at me is that I personally don't think Liberals have a great shot. So I agree right up until recently. Like, they were dead in the water. And we've got a very long history of parties in power changing leadership before the election so that there's somebody leading the party that wasn't elected. And I don't think it's ever happened that they were voted back in after. They were never able to maintain their the status of the governing party. But
Justin Trudeau is going to continue to serve, right, for the rest.
No, until they change leaders, until they establish another leader, but whatever. But the fact is, their chances were basically zero. Now there's at least a fighting chance, because I think people are recognizing the rhetoric, at least, even if Pierre Poilievre is not is saying sort of the right things about we're gonna stand against Trump and whatever.
Yeah.
They're recognizing at least a lot of the same rhetoric. The campaigning on, for the longest time, you're saying Canada's broken, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is bad, I'm going to fix it, this is the only...
Yeah.
And now, when he's being attacked by Trump, he's having to pivot. Mm-hmm. And people are recognizing, it's not that sincere. It's not that believable.
I've also seen a bunch of attack ads against Mark Carney now. Mm-hmm. Mostly the same one. And it's interesting how structurally poorly made it is. And I don't know how obvious it is to other people, but though they've pulled quotes and like fragments of like things that he said, and they're trying to associate him with the carbon tax, right?
Right.
They're calling him Carbon Tax Carney. And like, it just doesn't really work for me because one of the things that they pull is a quote where he says is essentially a shadow carbon tax, right? Mm-hmm. And they pulled it entirely out of context, and they say he's interested in like doing something that would essentially be, and then like pulling that quote. And I look at that and I go, I can think about a million different reasons why somebody would say the words essentially a shadow carbon tax without the thing being, I want to establish a shadow carbon tax. Right? Because it's not like, if I had my way, I would do it like this. It's just the words shadow carbon tax. Right? Yeah. And then they have like another quote, which I'm not even sure if it's from him or somebody else, but it's like, like shady guy or something like that. And I like the things that they've chosen to pull.
They're not impressive, right? They're not convincing.
They're not impressive. They're not convincing. They feel like they're taken out of context just by themselves. You know what I mean? Like
so it already sounds like
the snippet of the quote where I'm and it's not even to say that the information they're providing is not true, because it is possible that if I looked into it more, that the quote in its larger context would be along the same lines as the information that they're trying to convey about him, right? Mm-hmm. I have not looked into it personally. I don't have a sort of first-hand account or first-hand understanding of it. Yeah. But I listened to the video and I go, this is nothing, right? Yeah. It does make me want to do my own research about candidates, which I think you should always do no matter what, right? Right. And it does give me, a potential starting point. Like if I, for example, really, really cared about the carbon tax, I guess, then I would want to look up how Mark Carney feels about the carbon tax, right?
Yeah, but they've all dropped it. I think everybody who's vying for the Liberal leadership have disavowed it. And I think, it's unpopular. It's been poorly marketed, and it's been attacked enough that you can't use the words anymore. Yeah. But I think the idea that we need to put a proper disincentive for making our world uninhabitable is a good thing. Yeah. And how you do it by making the people in the industries that are most responsible for it pay makes a lot of sense, right? It's like making cigarette makers pay for healthcare. Mm-hmm. Like, it makes a lot of sense. The problem is that well has been poisoned. And, the one thing I'll give the Reform Party credit for is they know how to make somebody else sound bad. Mm-hmm. They're not doing a very good job now, because right now they're just making Pierre Poilievre sound bad, because he does not strike me as the kind of person who's going to be willing or able to stand up to an existential threat. For the longest time, I didn't even realize. I heard people use the term existential, but it took me a while to figure out what the actual definition was, because I was too lazy to look it up. And when I finally looked it up, it totally makes sense, right? Something that threatens the very existence of something. Mm-hmm. And so when the U.S. threatens to invade and annex Canada, I think it's easy to complain about the people who are in power and you want to replace them. It's very much more difficult to present yourself as somebody who looks like they're capable, because all I've seen from the Reform Party is this sucks, without a real plan to fix things. And I guess the idea that a lot of parties have latched onto, and the way they seem to be sort of running themselves is if they have a good idea, they don't want to share it because they're too afraid that somebody else will get credit for implementing it. And I think that says a lot about the way they choose to govern and what they really care about, because they care more about winning than they care about having saving the country. Mm-hmm. Right? And what struck me actually in some of the coverage I heard about the Liberal leadership debates was when it was in French, and Mark Carney apparently isn't very good in French, and he said a few things wrong. Chrystia Freeland, who was more proficient, and by rights, given how much experience she had, should probably be a better candidate. But I think, the whole woman thing is probably hurting her because of all the misogyny and stuff. But at this point, I'm more worried that we have somebody who's gonna, stand up for Canada. Yeah. But to me, the idea is that they're able to work cooperatively, and it matters more to them that they don't give more ammunition for others to attack them.
Yeah,
I think that's kind of neat, actually, because we don't see enough of that in politics. When you're competing, like the willingness of people to just sling mud is disheartening.
It is. It's tough because it really, because it's effective. It's kind of like the tragedy of the commons, right? Where if enough people are doing it, it becomes sort of one of the only viable strategies.
Sure.
Right? But if nobody's doing it, then everybody is better off, right? You get to focus on your platform. You get to actually campaign based off of what you want. You get less disinformation. You get less fear-mongering, right? But it only works if everybody's willing to do it, right? If somebody's willing to be sort of underhanded or like aggressive, then it sets the tone in a way that disadvantages people who aren't willing to do it as much, right?
Yeah.
And so just when you were talking earlier about sort of the carbon tax being unpopular as like a term and being marketed poorly, it reminded me there's Richard Wolff, who's a Marxist economist, had a lecture where he talked about sort of socialism and Marxism and communism. And part of what he was talking about was how they came to be so unpopular in the States. And he had a quote that was my first exposure to it was a meme where he goes, a lot of people think that socialism is when the government does stuff, and when the government does too much stuff, that's communism, right? And it's a really simplified word, like every sort of social program is socialism, right?
Right.
And there's a distinction. There's often a joke when there's like census or polls done in places like Florida, where there will be a really high proportion of Floridians who support some form of social programming, some pretty leftist form of social programming, and then but then conservatives are polling massively high. So you see, like, the thing that they want is much more left than the people that they're voting for, right? It probably, in some cases, even as left or more left than, like, the liberal candidates, right? The Democrats that they'd be voting for.
Right.
So it is interesting how, in a lot of ways, I think that the way that politics are packaged and branded can often matter more than the actual like outcomes of bipartisan or whatever, right? And the way that people vote seems so detached from that. And I'm sure that to some extent I also fall for it sometimes, right?
I think we all do.
I think it's the way that our brains work, but it's the way that like good marketing, and it is so frustrating, right? Because really, like, ultimately what you want is to have values, to have beliefs, to have things that you want and things that you think should happen, right? And you should be able to, as clearly and with as a straight a line from action to outcome as possible, understand, if I'm voting for these people, this is what they want, this is what they're going to do. And like, everything else is really a distraction, right? And it's a useful distraction. And as the people who benefit the most from that distraction are people who are able to successfully brand stuff to you, and the people who are able to sell you something different from the thing that you actually want, right? So the people that benefit most are the people who have our best interests in mind least, right? And so it's a very frustrating position to be in.
So, to me, the perfect example in the States of that kind of marketing is how the number of people who are willing to say that they hate Obamacare, but love the Affordable
Medicaid,
Care Act.
And the ACA,
Yeah. So no point belaboring that, because I think it's obvious to most people from the outside looking in that there is definitely a marketing problem.
Yeah.
And when I say that, I mean the over-marketing and under-education if that's a thing, because I think you're the better educated you are, the more media savvy you are, the less vulnerable you are to that kind of marketing. I mean, again, I totally admit it. I'm going to fall for that sometimes too, but your ability to pivot from it is better the more aware you are and the better educated you are about how media works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to end our Justice Q&A.
Maybe let's just end it a little bit, if only because to follow up the part where the comment that Burke Show Me Mad MMS mentioned, I think the economy comment I made was not answered, or I didn't get to the answer I really expect.
I was going to say that maybe we save that for next week just because I want to like actually talk about that properly.
Oh, okay. So it's going to be big. I thought it'd be quick. Okay, perfect.
Well, if you want to talk about it really quick, we can.
Well, just...
So Burke says, every time I say CAD is the only currency that matters, I watch the USD/CAD keep getting worse, kind of relating to tariffs. Jokes aside, CAD dropping means that there could be an economic boost for Canada. Things are essentially cheaper for everyone else. Sucks if you live in Canada and want to travel, though.
Yeah, it's... All right, so let me just do the short answer I was going to do. Maybe next time you can do the more complicated and educated answer.
Well, I don't know if I'm more complicated or educated. I just wanted to give us more time to talk about it.
So I do want to point out that, I mean, it all depends. The basic part of it is, yes, your stuff is more attractive to other people because it's cheaper to them. Sure. So maybe you'll generate more business. But everything you buy is going to cost more. It's not just travel. Any imported goods cost more. So the more tied that our economy is to another economy where we buy a lot of stuff, and we buy a crap ton of stuff from States, they buy a crap ton of stuff from us. And if we're looking at just stuff, we buy more from them than they buy from us, except for energy. Mm-hmm. And that's the only part that's unbalanced. So more people buying stuff and spending money with you, it really only helps if you're not paying all of that difference to get more stuff to live. And that entirely depends on your willingness and ability to replace some of that and to get some of the imports somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And if you can't, if there's stuff that's irreplaceable, then I think you're screwed.
Yeah. Okay, so then maybe that is enough of a response to it. I just figured that sometimes we do a lot more rambling, but I'm satisfied with that.
Yeah, I don't
know if I have anything more interesting to say than that.
Yeah, I feel like because we're just extending ourselves so far back.
Yeah, while we're here.
Fair enough. While we're here, Burke. So we appreciate it, Burke. Show Me Mad MMS. I love that.
Burke's homemade memes. Okay. So to finish up, that's going to do it for content. But we have some people to thank, and if you're listening right now, that people includes you. But most importantly, if you're giving us money, we feel a much higher sense of responsibility for thanking you. So we'd like to give a huge thank you to, and I say responsibility. We also feel more thankful. It's
gratitude.
Exciting. Yeah, there's
not
gratitude. Gratitude is better than responsibility. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. We have to thank all the people who pay us.
No, not at all.
Yeah,
I love it.
So we'd like to give a huge thanks to our patrons on Patreon. It's Michael Devries, Irvin, Ruiz, Hoshi 127, and Nora Klimek, who are supporting us on the credited level, right? Because our levels, we're not doing extra work for this particularly. Was part of our deal with Patreon. It was like, if you want to give us money, you can, but really you're giving us money because you think we should have money, right?
Yeah.
And not for the benefits, but they are technically paying at the level where we say we're going to thank you, right?
Yes. Explicitly.
Yeah. So thank you so much for your support. And we'd also like to thank all of you just for, supporting us however you do. That's commenting, watching, liking.
Yes.
Whatever.
Thank you.
At the very least, you've reached it the end of the video. So thank you for that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Komoda.